Hello, I'm Andrew Perkins, and this is the first video in a series for Tuts Plus, where I'll be showing you the basics of working with the Symfony 2 PHP framework. In this video, we'll cover downloading, installing, and configuring the framework. Afterwards, we'll take a look at the most commonly used features of Symfony 2 so that you can get a quick overview at what's possible. So this video is mostly going to be about installation and configuration, which I'll walk you through, and then I'll be glancing over some of the components of Symfony 2 in regards to basic web app usage. Now, in later videos in this series, I will go into much more detail about those topics. So let's get started today with installing Symfony. First, let's take a look at the Symfony website. Just going to bring it up here in Firefox. This is symfony.com, and here you'll just find lots of information about the Symfony 2 framework, its benefits, tutorials, documentation, and other services. Now, if we take a look at the documentation, now this is what I feel the most important page on their website. It's the documentation. It is written well, and it's fairly easy to find what you're looking for if you're already used to using MVC-style frameworks. Now, the search feature down here could use some work as it doesn't always find certain things, but everything is laid out well. Now, if you're ever in doubt about what to do and you're not sure how to approach something, be sure to come here to the documentation. All right, let's begin by downloading and installing Symfony 2. To install Symfony 2, you have a couple of options. You could click the big download button here at the top, and then just extract all of its contents. However, I prefer to use Composer. So I'm just going to click on the Get Started link, and then let's go to Download Symfony. And right here, you can see that we can install using Composer using this command. So I'm just going to switch into my terminal. I'm going to change directories into my sites directory, and I'm going to run Composer create -project Symfony /framework standard edition, and then we just need to give our application a name. I'm going to name it Tuts Plus Symfony / and then we'll specify the version here, which is going to be 2.4.2, and hit enter. There we go. Now this will download and install Symfony for you into the directory named Tuts Plus Symfony. There we go. You can see it's now installing some of the dependencies. All right, now we just need to enter in our database information. I'm just going to allow it to use MySQL, so I'll just hit enter here to take the default. I'm also going to leave the host as 127.0.0.1. I'll leave the port as null. I'll leave the database name as, actually, I'm going to change that. Let's set this to Tuts Plus Symfony. We'll leave the user as root. The password, I'll just leave that as empty. We'll leave that as SMTP. We'll leave that at the default, and so on. Now let's enter in our secret here. I'm just going to type in some random characters. And perfect, that finishes our Symfony 2 installation. Now let's test it out in the browser to make sure everything is working properly, at least up to this point. As you can see, it takes very little work and configuration to get your app downloaded, installed, and then running in a browser. So I'll start up the web server. Let's change directories into our Tuts Plus Symfony application. Whoops, we actually need to go into sites / Tuts Plus Symfony. Nope, I'm already in there. Let's list this out here. Oh, I'm just spelling it wrong is all. Let's use tab to prevent that from happening again. All right, now we're in there. Now to start up the server, we can run php app /console server:run. As you can see, our site is at port 8000. Let's switch into the browser. I'll open up a new tab, and we can just visit localhost port 8000, and here's our Symfony application. All right, so we know our installation was successful. Now let's take a look at the actual framework and some of its code. I'm going to switch back into my terminal, and I'm just going to stop the server, and I'll run the Sublime command to open up the Symfony code into Sublime. All right, here's our Tuts Plus Symfony application. Now Symfony 2 comes with some basic web app code that we can take a look at. By default, all of the code within Symfony 2 and even Symfony 2 itself is stored within bundles. Now, bundles allow you to group up related code, share your code, and use others' code. You can, of course, also create your own custom bundles, but let's just take a look at what ships with Symfony by default. So your bundles are stored under the source directory. Now the default and the sample bundle starts with a vendor name of Acme. So you can see we have this Acme folder, and then inside of it, we have our demo bundle. Now, if we wanted, we could have other bundles inside of this Acme vendor, but basically, this is just a structure of folders and files that we use to store all of the code for this Acme demo bundle feature that we'd be building for our application. Now, within the demo bundle, if you've worked with other MVC frameworks, you should be pretty familiar with what you're seeing. Let's start within the controller folder. You can see in here we have several controller class files, but for this video, let's just take a look at this welcome controller. Now, as you can see, it's just a basic PHP class file. It's within the Acme demo bundle controller namespace, and it's using this main controller class, giving our controller a lot of cool functionality, which we'll see a bit of now, and we'll go into more detail on that in a future video. But as you can see, our class, welcome controller, extends that main controller class. And then inside, we have a single controller, our index action method. So this welcome controller.php file is a controller class, which is just used to group up methods, which are the actual controllers. So in Symfony 2, the class itself is not the controller. Instead, the controller is one of the methods inside of the controller class. Actions within controller classes are controllers themselves. For example, this index action method here is a controller. Now, the main purpose of any controller is simply to display a response back to the user. In our case, we're wanting to display HTML back to the user in the browser. So in this index action, it's simply rendering an HTML view file. But we're not using regular HTML files. We're using a specific templating language called Twig. This just allows us to integrate PHP and HTML together cleanly. We'll learn more about Twig in a future video. So now that we've seen our controller, let's go ahead and take a look at the template itself. So inside of our demo bundle, under Resources, Views, Welcome, open up index.html.twig. Here you can see that this is mostly just basic HTML with some Twig mixed in. Now at the top, without going into too much detail about Twig's syntax, as we're going to cover all of this in the templating video, but essentially this view file is just extending another view file, the main layout.html.twig file. We're also setting the page's title and a header. And then we create the actual content for the page. So we have an H1 heading, this paragraph saying, "Congratulations, your app has been installed." And then we have some links for the documentation for Symfony 2. So that's basically it for the view file. Now, the last component we need to look at is the routing. So a route allows a user to enter in a URI within their browser and access one of our controllers, which will then display a response back to the user. So Symfony 2 allows us to customize our routes in a lot of ways, and we'll take a look at routing in more detail in the routing video. But for now, let's see the default routing for this Acme demo bundle. So inside of that resources folder, under config, open up routing.yaml. Now we're only going to be concerned with this top route for the welcome page. So we have its name of _welcome. We then have the pattern, which is basically its URL. This is set to a /. This is just for the app's root URL, essentially our home page. And then we have the defaults array, where we set which controller this URL points to. Here it's connected to our Acme demo bundle, our welcome controller class, and then our index controller. So if a user requests our root URL, it's going to use our welcome controller class and its index controller. Our index controller is just going to display that index view file. Our index view file then uses some HTML to display the response back to us in the browser. So let's switch back into Firefox here. So when we request that root URL, that's localhost port 8000, we get our index view file here with our intro heading and our paragraph, as well as the links to the documentation. Pretty simple stuff, right? Okay. Now this was just an introduction video to whet your appetite for Symfony 2 and its features. Throughout this series, we'll learn more about controllers, templating, routing, databases, forms, validation, and authentication. In the next video, we'll actually get started coding and dig into learning more about Symfony 2 controllers. So I hope you found this intro helpful, and thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.